Via della Rosa by Victor Yap and Doris Mock. Chapter 1. Behold the Lamb of God. Isaiah chapter 53, verses 1 to 12. Bill Hybels told about a particular Indian tribe who was suffering from the effects of a severe drought. Food was scarce, and members of the tribe were beginning to steal from each other in order to survive. The chief knew that would be the death of the tribe, so he issued a law that the next person caught stealing would be taken to the center of the village, tied to a pole, and publicly whipped. The next day, sure enough, a thief was caught. Everyone turned up to see who it was and to witness the punishment. To everyone's shock, the thief turned out to be the chief's own mother. What was he going to do? He was a good chief, and could not justly ignore the law he had made the day before. He had to be just, but good grief, this was his mom. She was old and frail. The beating could very well kill her, and he loved her. How could he cause her to suffer? What do you think he should do? Which should win, his love or his justice? Well, here's what he does. He orders that her wrists be tied to the pole so the beating can begin, and he calls the punisher to step forward, whip in hand. But before he gives the order to commence, he steps in between his mom and the punisher. He stretches his broad shoulders across her frail back, and with her body completely protected underneath his own, orders that the punishment be carried out. As the cords of the whip fall, they fall on him, and he absorbs the full brunt of her penalty. In that act, he was both just in carrying out the penalty and loving by suffering it himself. The most stirring, stylish, and shocking way to introduce Jesus the Messiah in the Bible, as attested in Acts 8:32, is Isaiah 53. The Messiah is both vulnerable and victorious, defenseless and dominant, tyrannized and triumphant. Christ is the suffering servant, the sacrificed Lamb of God, John 1:29. The spotless and unblemished Lamb, 1 Peter 1:19. This passage is a landmark in poetic literature, prophetic literature, and Old Testament literature. The three sections can be introduced by the Lord's name and work, verses 1, 6, and 10. How is God's will and wisdom manifested in Jesus' sufferings? What causes Jesus to suffer and die for mankind? What does his suffering mean to us? First, be drawn to the dear Lamb. Isaiah 53, verses 1 to 5. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Here is my version how different religions view suffering. Hinduism, deserved. Buddhism, denial. Islam, destiny. Christianity, disobedience or sin. Hinduism, self-made or accruement. Buddhism, subjugation or attachment. Islam, submission. Christianity, substitution or atonement. Hinduism, it's in your past. Buddhism, it's in your mind. Islam, it's in God's will. Christianity, Jesus paid it all. Hindus see suffering as deserved and self-made, an accruement from the past misdeeds. To avoid suffering, Buddhists deny themselves and subjugate attachment to things and people, feelings and desires. Muslims calls for submission as a negative, passive, and muted response to the destiny or fate of God for men. Christians see suffering as a result of disobedience, but Jesus was God's atonement and substitute for the sins of men. It's been said Jesus came to pay a debt he didn't owe because we owed a debt we couldn't pay. The identity of the mysterious person or subject of the author is waiting to be revealed, verse 1, which means uncovered, Genesis 9:21, appear, Genesis 35:7, discover, Exodus 20:26, open, Numbers 22:31, show, 1 Samuel 20:2, and publish, Esther 3:14. He is waiting to be approached, accepted, and acknowledged. There is 3 no in verse 2. No form, nor comeliness, no beauty, King James Version. The first refers to structure, the second splendor, by implication to favor, honor, and uplifted, and the third for looks, sight, and countenance. Desire, verse 2, means pleasant, Genesis 2:9. Desire, Genesis 3:6. Covet, Exodus 20:17. Precious, 2 Chronicles 20:25. And beloved, Daniel 9:23. Nobody embraces the person, envies his position, or epitomizes the persecution. Form, comeliness, beauty, structure, splendor, sight. 3 words are repeated in verse 3 and 4, sorrows, grief, and esteem. Sorrows, or suffering and pain in NIV, is plural and grief is singular. Sorrow is grief, pain, and anguish, while grief is sickness, Deuteronomy 7:15, and disease, 2 Kings 8:8. Sorrows are in the heart versus grief is in the health. The 2 main verbs in verse 3 is acquainted and esteem, King James Version. Familiar with pain is acquainted with grief, King James Version, which is to know grief passively. Hold in esteem, verse 3, means consider, count, or conceive. The first is his experience, familiar with pain, and the other is others' estimate. The 3 relationships are reversed. First, the focus on himself, verse 3, he is, followed by the focus on his relationship with others, verse 3, we hid, and finally the focus on his relationship with God, verse 4, smitten of God. On he, verse 3, he is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. With others, verse 3, and we hid as it were our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Verse 4, surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. And with God, verse 4, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted, King James Version. It ends with chastisement, condemnation, and censure by God, the worst, the highest, and lowest form of punishment. On top of being despised and disregarded, or esteemed, by men, he was damned by God. The he and we relationship is unmistaken and unleashed in verses 2 to 7. On he, verse 2, for he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness. Verse 3, he is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid as it were our faces from him. He was despised. Verse 4, surely he hath borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Verse 5, but he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. On we, verse 2, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. Verse 3, and we esteemed him not. Verse 4, Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. Verse 5, and with his stripes we are healed. Meaning our distancing from him, or separated, our disregard of him, or scorned, our distortion of him, suffered, our discovery about him, finally sacrificed. Verse 4's leading verbs are took up or borne, bore or carried, and esteemed. Take up, verse 4, is usually translated as bear, Genesis 4:13. Lift up, Genesis 13:10. Carry, Genesis 46:5, while bear or carry has to do with the load or burden. He lifted, lightened, and lessened our burdens. Pierced and crushed, verse 5, refer to his being stained or pierced and smashed or crushed, respectively. Pierced is often translated as defile, Genesis 49:4, polluted, Exodus 20:25, profane, Leviticus 18:21, and stain, Isaiah 23:9, while crushed is broken in pieces, Job 19:2, smite down, Psalm 143:3. One is religiously and morally, and the other is physically and bodily. However, the leading verb is healed, rapha, also translated as physicians, Genesis 52, repair, 1 Kings 18:30, made whole, Job 5:18, and cure, Jeremiah 33:6. The word means more than physical healing of diseases, Psalm 103:3. Other usages in the Bible include healing one's soul, Psalm 41:4, broken in heart, Psalm 147:3, Zechariah 11:16, wound, Isaiah 30:26, Jeremiah 30:17, hurt, Jeremiah 6:14, and backsliding, Hosea 14:4. The context refers to our griefs, our sorrows, verse 4, our transgressions, our iniquities, and our peace, verse 5. Second, be delivered by the dying lamb, Isaiah 53, verses 6 to 9. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. After the death of her father, the daughter tried to persuade her 80-year-old mother to move in with her. The older woman was adamant. No, absolutely not. I've always said I've never lived with any of my kids. I've seen too many problems arise from that kind of situation. The younger woman said, Yes, Mom, but you are different. I know I am, replied her mother, but you're not. Verse 6 has to all. None is exempted, excused, or excluded. And verses 7 to 9 are the circumstances and cause of his death, before, during, and after. Before. Gone astray, verse 6 is translated as wander, Genesis 20:13. Go astray, Exodus 23:4. Seduce, 2 Kings 21:9. Err, 2 Chronicles 33:9. Stagger, Job 12:25. Deceive, Job 15:31. Out of the way, Isaiah 28:7. Turn, verse 6 is to look, face, and head. Verse 6 is the course, gone astray, and the consequences laid on him. The first is the direction, the second is the disaster, and the third is the deliverance. Laid, verse 7, is a rare and lighter translation. It is usually to fall, force, hoist, or level upon a person, as in violence and viciousness. Exodus 5:3, Judges 8:21, 1 Samuel 22:17, 2 Samuel 1:15, and 1 Kings 2:25. During, verse 7 has sheep, common gender, lamb, young, and sheep, feminine. The 5 leading verbs in verse 7 are oppressed, opened, led, or brought, silent or dumb, opened. Oppressed, verse 7, is translated as taskmaster, Exodus 3:7, exact, Deuteronomy 15:3, and distressed, 1 Samuel 13:6. Open, verse 7, open not his mouth. 2 times in the same book can be translated as loose, Isaiah 5:27, and unstopped, Isaiah 35:5. Led, verse 7, can be translated as carry, Job 10:19, brought forth, Job 21:30, and led forth, Isaiah 55:12. Silent, verse 7, is dumb, is a verb, translated as bound, Genesis 37:7, or dumb, Psalm 39:2. Oppress, open, led, silent, open, cruelty, call or cry, carried, calm, call or cry. After. The 3 verbs in verse 8 are taken, protest, declare, cut off. Cut off, verse 8, is divide, 1 Kings 3:25. Cut down, 2 Kings 6:4. Snatch, Isaiah 9:20. To destroy, divide, exclude, or decide. Jesus died a horrific, hideous, and heinous, hate-filled, heavy-handed, and heartless. Taken, protest, cut off, caught, complain, complete. The overall picture from verses 6 to 9 can be charted. The Lord, verse 6, all we like sheep have gone astray, we have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. Us all. Shouldered. Her shearers, verse 7, he was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. Her shearers, slaughtered. My people, verse 8, he was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was stricken. My people, substituted for. And others, verse 9, and he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. His death, stigmatized. Third, be devoted to the divine Lamb. Isaiah 53:10-12. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord make his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. There was a man who had 4 sons. He wanted his sons to learn not to judge things too quickly, so he sent them each on a quest, in turn, to go and look at a pear tree that was a great distance away. The first son went in the winter, the second in the spring, the third in summer, and the youngest son in the fall. When they had all gone and come back, he called them together to describe what they had seen. The first son said that the tree was ugly, bent, and twisted. The second son said, no, it was covered with green buds and full of promise. The third son disagreed. He said it was laden with blossoms that smelled so sweet and looked so beautiful. It was the most graceful thing he had ever seen. The last son disagreed with all of them. He said it was ripe and drooping with fruit, full of life and fulfillment. The man then explained to his sons that they were all right, because they had each seen but only one season in the tree's life, drooping with fruit, full of life and fulfillment. He told them that you cannot judge a tree or a person by only one season, and that the essence of who they are and the pleasure, joy, and love that come from that life can only be measured at the end, when all the seasons are up. If you give up when it's winter, you will miss the promise of your spring, the beauty of your summer, fulfillment of your fall. The leading verbs in verse 10 are will or pleased, cause to suffer, make or offering, before, see or seed, prolong, days, and prosper after. Will or pleased, satisfaction, pleased. Cause to suffer, suffering, punishment. Make, offering, sacrifice, propitiation. See or seed, posterity. Prolong, days, stay, permanence. Prosper, succeed, proven. Will, verse 10, means delight, Genesis 34:19. Like, Deuteronomy 25:8. Pleased, Judges 13:23, and favor, 2 Samuel 20, verse 11. Verse 10's first verb, will or pleased, is the focus because the verse ends with the noun form, will or pleasure. It is the Lord's delight in his submission, servanthood, and selflessness. Cause to suffer, verse 10, is worse in meaning with the emphasis on the results. Weak, Judges 16:7, sick, 1 Samuel 19:14, wounded, 1 Kings 22:34, and grievous, Jeremiah 10:19. Prolong is tarried long, Numbers 9:19. Lengthen, Deuteronomy 25:15. Outlive, Judges 2:7. And defer, Proverbs 19:11. Prosper is to be proven, profitable, and preeminent. Offspring or seed is posterity, prolong is permanence, and prosper is preeminence. The four leading verbs in verse 11 are see, satisfy, justify, and bear. Verse 11 adds there, so it is not about the person or his anymore. Unlike the previous verse also that has only the second person pronoun he. The title, my servant, occurs 15 times in Isaiah, of which 11 times the servant is named. Example, Isaiah, David, Jacob. But 4 times are merely my servant. Isaiah 42:1, 19, 43:10, 49:6, which refers to the Messiah along with my righteous servant, verse 11. He is not just my servant, but my righteous servant, because he will justify or make righteous, verb form from noun righteous, the iniquities, transgressions, and sin of many. Many, verse 11, and iniquities include their iniquities, verse 11, includes our iniquities, verse 5, and the iniquity of us all, verse 6. transgressions comprise our transgressions, verse 5, and the transgression of my people, verse 8. Sin denotes sin of many, verse 12. All is plural, prominent, and purposeful. The three words for sin are pesha, or disobedience, insubordination, verse 5, transgressions, noun, verse 8, transgression, noun, verse 12, transgressors, verb formed twice. Avon, or depravity, immorality, verse 5, iniquities, 6, iniquity, 11, iniquities. Chet, or damage, injury, verse 12, sin, translation, Genesis 41:9, faults, Ecclesiastes 10:4, offenses. C, his soul, King James Version, satisfied, his soul, justify, his knowledge, my righteous servant, and bear their iniquities. The last verse, verse 12, has two repetitions, divide and transgressors, and 5 leading verbs, divide, twice, poured out, numbered, bore, made intercession, all verbs ending with people, great, strong, his, many, transgressors. The last verse has 2, many, great, and many. The last verse also ends with transgressors, people, rather than transgressions. Give, or divide, the great, greatness. Divide the spoils with the strong, gain. Poured out his life, gift. Numbered, with the transgressors, grouping. Bore, the sin of many, guilt. Made intercession, for the transgressors, guidance. Conclusion. Much as we face hardship and distress, the Bible tells us the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. Romans 8:18. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. 2 Corinthians 4:17. As witnesses to the sufferings of Christ, we shall also be partakers of the glory that shall be revealed. 1 Peter 5:1. Are you ashamed of Christ and his word? Luke 9:26. Are you ashamed of the gospel of Christ? Romans 1:16. And the testimony of our Lord, 2 Timothy 1:8. Do you know he died for you to deliver you from death to life, to turn from darkness into light, from yielding to sin to yielding to righteousness? Lent Questions, Chapter 1, Isaiah 6. The Lord suffered for us. He need not be crucified, but he was willing to obey. We too have to learn from the Lord, willing to suffer for his sake. As Christians, we are bound to suffer all kinds of suffering, but we can ask the Lord to help us, so that we will not be shaken. We know that God has given Christ to save us. He suffers even more than us, and we do not know that his suffering is for our glory. Ask the Lord to help me so that I would not waver in my suffering, but I can love the Lord even more. God makes things happen in his own time. We must have enduring faith, not to despair, because then the Lord will do exactly what he promised. Father, I may not be suffering today, but if the day of my suffering arrives, please do not make me despair, and that my faith will not be shaken.